I don't look like a farmer, do I? No. I learned a lot about farming because for many years, serving the church in the Diocese of Fort Wayne, South Bend, and in some parishes that were farmland parishes, I did everything that a farmer would do. At least I sat on the tractor and watched how things were done. Modern day farming is in many ways a pleasure. How many farmers right here say, as they say, city slickers, eh? Modern day farming is a very pleasurable job, task, occupation, whatever. Very different from what it used to be before. One of the things that they use in farming today is called a combine. It's a combine because it combines very many tasks, different tasks, all in one motion. Huge machines, I mean. These things are not $1.29 and they're never on sale, and there's no blue light special on them. They're expensive pieces of equipment, but they combine various tasks. It's interesting to watch them at work. And of course, the farmer who owns one, not every farmer does, the larger farmers do, and then they basically rent it out either in terms of services or in terms of cash, but generally in terms of services. That's how farmers work with one another. So it'll cut the crop, it'll harvest it, and it'll separate the grain from, it's all done so very well done. Separate the grain from the stalks. The stalks get thrown out again into the field. The grain is all collected on top, and then they go from there to a truck, and it's unloaded onto the truck, and you know, that's just the way it goes. And then they go out and fill it up again, and okay. All that falls down back into the ground is used in some ways. Oftentimes, excuse me using this as an example, but they do it differently in different places. Oftentimes, the hogs are sent into the field, and the hogs can feast on them. That's just the way life goes. In olden days, now we're talking about 2,000 plus years ago, even before Jesus. Jesus didn't invent all of this, he never claimed to. But in olden times, many of these tasks were done separately. The seed was sown, and after the seed was sown, you sat back and you prayed and you watched and looked out every day, and a little at a time, what used to be arid now looks green. And farmers get very happy. They continue their prayer. They always do. They continue their prayer that everything would be favorable to the harvest, that the sun would come up when it needs to give some warmth to the plant and to the seed, and there is rain that will germinate the seed. They know all of that stuff, and they are very grateful for a good harvest. So the parable today needs a little explanation. First of all, there were no microphones. If Jesus was here talking to the community without a microphone, he couldn't be heard. And if the place was full and there were a lot of people around, he couldn't be heard. So the disciples, those who traveled with him, those who were part of the traveling group, they would get instructions. Every teacher did this. He did what other teachers did. They would get instructions about what he's going to share with the people. And as the crowd multiplied and became larger, they would be separated into smaller groups. And the disciples would take over in those little groups and say, this is what he's talking about today. So imagine that little situation. Today, microphones take care of it for numbers larger than this and smaller than this even, but nevertheless, these are modern ways of doing things. So having explained parables to his disciples, and they had the mind of the master. To have the mind of the master, he doesn't have to say everything. because he has been constantly teaching and being in communion with them. They knew how he was thinking, and perhaps even knew some of the examples that he was going to give. Having the mind of the master was very important. Now, in our own day, leaders also have emissaries, as we'd say, not necessarily people that they send out someplace, but emissaries among the people who know the mind of the master, so to speak. Very important to know that, because certain things could be explained better in smaller groups. So the disciples knew the mind of the master. When Jesus started saying a parable, they would piece it together with other things that he had taught them, and they would explain his mind. We do that even today. Even today. You're working for somebody and you want to spread the good news of his leadership, etc. You know the mind of the master, so you can explain it to people. Once in a great while, maybe you don't know the mind of the master. That's also a possibility. Now, he's using the parable, a form of teaching. Because when people hear the story, yeah, that sounds good, that sounds correct, that's the way it's done. What's the meaning of all of this? Why is he? You know, a simple mind thinks in simple ways. It's good to have a simple mind. Doesn't have to be sophisticated. The people in Jesus' day were the least educated. Simple minds. It didn't mean that they couldn't understand. It meant that sometimes they needed help in order to place that into their own lives. Because every teacher, in telling a story, had an intent that the story should be applied to life. Great. Simple minds. So Jesus is telling them, you know, this is like a farmer sowing the seed. After a little while, there are weeds that are going to come up. And he also used the example, he said, you know, those weeds were sown by the evil one. Okay. So they said, let's go and pull up the weeds. No, don't pull up the weeds. Let them grow together. I was asking the deacon before Mass, I said, I don't know the name of all the weeds, but there are some weeds, at least in a wheat field, they start just like wheat. And it's later on, when they do not germinate into wheat, then you know they're weeds. Perhaps that's what happened. Don't pull up the weeds now. Let it grow with the wheat. At harvest time, said Jesus, at harvest time, I am going to send the laborers out into the field. This is a story, mind you. And I'll tell them, gather up the wheat. But gather up also the weeds and burn the weeds. And the soil that was productive, unfortunately, allowed the weeds to grow. So very seldom did Jesus actually come out and explain the application of the story to real life. Very seldom. He would leave it like that, and then any teacher would do that. Leave it that way, and people will begin to talk among themselves, and they will apply the story to their lives. Happens today. This is not unusual. This is not unusual. But he then went into the house, and the disciples said, now tell us more clearly. In case you use the story again, tell us more clearly how we can explain it to the people. And I'll conclude this reflection with reading this again. Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field. Deacon, thank you for reading the gospel passage. This is for emphasis, okay? He said in reply, he who sows good seed is the Son of Man. God sowing good seed. The field is the world. The good seed, the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one. And the enemy who sows the weeds is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. Just as weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all who cause others to sin, all evildoers, the weeds sown by the devil. He'll throw them into the fiery furnace, and there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. At the end of the age, harvest time, judgment time. But the righteous, that's the good wheat, will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. And just as Jesus concluded, I conclude this reflection by saying, whoever has ears ought to hear. Amen. A word now about my little friend Jackson, who is going to make his first Holy Communion. Are you awake, kid? Okay. Going to make his first Holy Communion today, receive Jesus for the first time. We're very happy for you and for your family.